But the bittersweet emotion is actually a very rich emotion. It's like, there was one research study in particular that I think it was the Green Mile, the movie, but I could be getting that detail wrong, where participants had to watch a scene in a movie that was happy and sad at the same time. Or an example in real life might be like, if someone that you love passes away after a long, painful battle with a terminal illness, you're
Right.
devastated because of the loss. But at the same time, there's a piece of you that almost feels like a relief because they're not suffering anymore, too.
Right. Right.
And so I think, and I love this conversation about nuance, because it isn't that you're happy or you're sad. And like I said, like when I first started studying happiness, I thought, I don't want to feel sad. I want to get rid of that emotion and I just want to be happy all the time. And yet, one, as I've sort of got into this research, but even like if I reflect, last summer, I went through a breakup after my divorce, next one, breakup. And I remember thinking, okay, Gillian, in this situation, you've been researching happiness for, 6 or 7 years or whatever it was at that time. And so it's like, okay, time to like put your pedal to the metal and do the things that you talk about. And one of the things when I went through that breakup, I thought, okay, well, what can I do? And so one, obviously talking about it with friends and with a therapist, but also part of it was allowing myself to feel sad. And what kept happening, it was so bizarre, was that I would talk to my friends, right? And these are my friends that know me and that know I study happiness. And when they were like, how are you doing? And I would say, I'm sad, I'm heartbroken. They would say things like, well, how can you be sad? You study happiness. And I'm like, well, I'm going through a breakup and that's a sad thing, right? Both can be true. Just because I study happiness doesn't mean that I'm happy all the time. And I actually like, when I reflect back on that entire experience and the growth that I had through it, um, I felt the range of emotion more than I ever had, and I think that there's something to that too, where it's like when you can experience great joy, great love, it opens up that end of the range. But then at the same time, there are times when we lose people or we lose a job or we grieve a friendship or whatever it is, where we actually go on the other range too. And I really think in terms of like, we want to live a life with like really the full spectrum of emotions. And in terms of healthy psychological functioning, the data is clear that that's what we want to move towards. Then it means being comfortable with the happy side of things, but also being uncomfortable with some of the more challenging emotions. And I'm very deliberate when I talk about emotions. I do not use the terms positive and negative. And the reason for that is because I don't think an emotion is inherently positive or negative, right? And again, Susan, if you like this topic, Susan David, it does a great job talking about how, emotions are data. Emotions are directives. They're a piece of information.
Yeah.
They're not the driver in the driver's seat. And I think sometimes like if you're feeling really stressed because you didn't hand something in at work on time, like you probably should feel stressed or anxious because you didn't meet your deadline. You were not accountable to what you
Yeah, the
said.
anxiety is not the abnormal emotion here. The thing that is
No,
aberrant is that you were late on your deadline. So the
it's
anxiety
forming
is an
you.
appropriate
Yes,
emotion. That's the appropriate response there. Yeah.
exactly. If you're at a funeral, grief makes sense. Happiness probably for most people doesn't, right? Although
Right.
my family uses humor as a coping mechanism. So sometimes there's that too. But I think that, overall, it's really about, like you said, it's not about being happy or sad, right? It's really about recognizing that we're humans. And I mean, especially to us, like they fluctuate throughout the day. I had this picture that a student drew me once. So I taught at Western for 4 years while I was doing my PhD. And I had a student draw me this sort of graph of her day. And she charted her happiness. And, she woke up in the morning and she got to sleep in. So it was high. And then she went for breakfast, but the calf didn't have the food she liked. So it went down and then went up because she went to the gym. And then it went down when she went to my class. But we'll put that aside. Um, maybe there was a test that day. But this sort of fluctuation, it's not about trying to keep everything constant, trying to force ourselves to be a certain way. It's really about allowing ourselves and giving ourselves the grace and the compassion and the self-compassion to be humans and to feel all of the things, like when we think about I was in Miami last week talking about this concept of psychological richness, or sometimes it's called psychological wealth. And what this research
Oh,
really
that is
talks
such a
about.
great name.
Mhm.
Psychological wealth. I love that. Yes.
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
And so the talk I did, I called it, I think, Beyond Happiness and Meaning, Psychological Wealth or Psychological Richness. I can't remember.
Great name.
But
Mm-hmm.
basically, I love this concept because what it understands is that, how we feel in our head really does impact the rest of our thing, right? And wealth can be a financial thing, but it can also be like a richness in terms of the quality of relationships that we have, the quality of relationships we have with ourselves. right? With even like our environment. All of these things really do contribute to it. And so when we can sort of step back and zoom out and take a broader perspective, I think that I'm excited to see where that goes. And I think especially since the pandemic, to see sort of one, that a lot of conversations are more normalized. And two, we're starting to really learn a lot more about this, right? Like I'm a happiness researcher, and until a year into my studies, I didn't know that you didn't want to be sad and you wanted to be happy. Like I thought you wanted to be happy all the time and not sad. So like we're learning a lot, and this is a very exciting field because we are. And I think that giving ourselves the grace to be humans, no matter what the circumstance is, not pretending to try to feel a certain way or to feel like I'm doing like air quotes, like should feel, right? That's when we get into a slippery slope of like not good psychological functioning.